professor of economics from the United States of America, who now is not in States, but in
Thailand.
Thailand, Phuket.
That's correct.
Okay, I have two topics I would like to discuss with you. So the first one, it's a present situation in Thailand. It is a well-known country as a touristic. So its main industry is a tourism. So is it tourism stroke now?
Well, it's not the main industry, but it's certainly a significant one. It's roughly 20% of GDP. Of course, on Phuket, it's the dominant industry, but not in all of Thailand. Thailand's a fairly industrialized economy with a strong financial sector as well. In any case, what we're seeing around Thailand, it's not just tourism, but the entire economy. But tourism is suffering the most. Just like in much of Europe now, where very poorly designed public policies, an overreaction to a virus has led to a near destruction of domestic economies. And so tourism, the fall of tourism here is only one part of the story. In those parts of Thailand where they normally have many tourists, of course, it's the most important.
Mm-hmm. But okay, so you said that it's not, it's just one part of the story. So which are the second, third, and others?
Well, I think in the case of Thailand, Thailand's an interesting case. It was the first country outside of China to report a case of this new novel coronavirus back in January. But since then, they've only had a total of just under 60 deaths attributed to COVID-related illnesses, which is pretty remarkable. I suspect the explanation is herd immunity from exposure to previous coronaviruses, including the first SARS episode. The fact that they use a lot of hydrochloroquine here as a medicine used to treat dengue and malaria. And they also use the BCG vaccine. It's administered at birth or shortly after birth. And also it's a relatively warm and humid country. Certainly where I am, I seldom am in, even though it's quite warm here most of the days, it's 30 degrees. I'm very rarely inside where there's air conditioning. So there's always lots of ventilation, certainly where I am. Of course, in Bangkok and large metro areas, it won't be that way. But so Thailand's situation is not unique, but it certainly had some of the lowest infection rates, case rates, and death rates. It's a country of 70 million people, and they only had, I think, just 59 deaths so far.
Yeah. What about the present situation? Because in Poland we have the, let's say, the second lockdown. So the government is introducing, they ban to meet people over 20 people. They ban going to fitness centers and so on and so on. So we have to wear masks all the time while being in the public, zones. So in cities, you have to wear it all the time.
Well, Thailand did have a lockdown. In fact, at one point, I think during April, I couldn't leave the city limits of the town where I live. They've also, in a sense, locked down the country. That is, there's no international flights, no scheduled international flights. So there's no international tourists coming in. Now, I think we need to stop using the word lockdown. It's really house arrest. This is literally, in my view, a crime against humanity, because it's an experimentation against the will of the people, based upon not science, but in fact simply political impulses. If you look at what the WHO, the World Health Organization, was saying in October 2019, they were totally against this kind of mass quarantine. Once China, a dictatorial autocratic regime, implemented this policy, it's unbelievable that other countries that normally respect individual rights and freedoms followed this dictatorship with this house arrest and imposed draconian measures on people that were, I believe, unnecessary and very destructive. Back in March, I began, or actually in February, I began reading as much as I could about the first SARS episode in medical journals. And I also read about flu epidemics in the past and pandemics. And in all of those, the most vulnerable segment of population was the elderly. Now, how is it that politicians and so-called public health bureaucrats did not understand that and see that as the appropriate starting point for a response to a new virus? You immediately take care of the elderly and the immune compromised. They didn't do that. They did the exact opposite of what science has told us for centuries, that you quarantine the vulnerable, or normally the people who are ill. In this case, if they had quarantined the elderly and the immunity compromised individuals, rather than putting the entire population under house arrest, we could have avoided the economic destruction, and we also would have avoided a lot of avoidable deaths from undiagnosed illnesses that were put aside because hospitals were being held for incoming patients stricken with COVID. In many cases, in many countries, those patients didn't show up, certainly in the US. They never really reached the crisis point that they feared. So governments have overreacted, and somehow populations have simply rolled over and given in. One example, I believe, is this crazy idea about washing hands. That was the first thing. They terrified people to say, wash your hands constantly. Now that was to keep people afraid, to remind them that there's danger out there. Wash your hands. This was an exaggeration to set people up for the next steps. The next step was wear a mask. Again, if you go back to 2019, they said wearing a mask was not only unnecessary, it's a poor strategy to deal with epidemic viruses. Again, all of this changed in 2020. Then the next thing, lockdowns, house arrest was introduced. Well, it's for your good. It's to make you more secure. We're going to take away your freedom to make you more secure. This has always been a terrible trade-off. And what happens is when governments take power, it's a ratchet effect. They don't give it up.
Yeah, I have, you know, because you asked that you don't understand how they could, the free countries who respect own property and the freedom of speech and so on liberty features we can have, that they could adopt what was invented in the tyrannist country. I have my own theory about this, that anyone who is in power, he is vulnerable to change his behavior, and he wants to maintain this power. And more, he don't care about the population, about the subordinates, but he wants to just rob them.
Yeah.
You know, rob, it's a very strong expression, but they want to exploit them. Sure. And so they did. If you go back to the history and you see some very interesting tool how to exploit your subordinates, I mean inflation. So it was used by Romans, by Greeks, by communists, by Democrats, by your beloved Delano Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You love him very much. And it was used by the communists, by our own rulers in the Soviet Union, in Polish People's Republic, and so on and so on. And now they discovered another kind of such a tool. It's a pandemia. It's a fake pandemia, but the people, it's some kind of a snowball, because so you put the grains of this idea to the journalists. They repeat it, and they strengthen this message, and people became more and more afraid. So today in Poland, there were some kind of discussion between journalists, and one of them said, okay, we provide the news about death rates, which is not very high, it's usual, but we provide this. We provide a lot of information about COVID because people love to hear it, to listen to it, and to show it, to see it. So we provide as much as we can, and this is, it strengthened this message. People became more aware, and the people in power can hide all of their cowardness as far as management is concerned, because they are not real managers. They are just some kind of, let's say, gangsters. They print money, which is not allowed. They print money, and they say, okay, we are managers. We develop the health sectors. We give money to the people, and so on and so on. But in a long term, it ruins the economy. So I think that these bastards discovered a new tool of governance. What do you think about this?
No, I think you're correct. It's an opportunistic way of expanding political power and extracting resources from the population. Now, in a way, though, it's a teaching moment for us to understand what are the limits of government. Now, the United States, one of the richest countries in the world, with the most advanced economy in the world, when the U.S. government tried to give $1,500 to each, I don't know how they decided. It was roughly 200 million people or 160 million people. I don't remember the number. But what you find then is that very quickly, the total amount of money that's given away is enormous. It goes beyond the capacity even of a big government like the U.S. So it shows you how robust an economy is, that people don't need normally to go to government to get a little bit of money, because every month, if they have a good job, they're going to make more than $1,500 in the U.S. every month. This was a one-time handout, and it added enormous amounts to the public sector debt. They can't do that over and over and over, month after month after month. But a private economy will generate that kind of revenue, income, and wealth without the state being involved directly. That is, the state can be the arbiter, the sort of referee, standing aside, allowing the private sector to create this income and wealth. But it shows us, and it really does show us, the incapacity of the state to deliver economic security. And again, I think this is a point that hasn't been made very clearly to people. And I think I think this is something that we really need to beat the drum about, that we really need to drive this point home. Unfortunately, because it's an election year in the United States, both political parties are falling all over themselves trying to spend more than the other one in order to gain votes. This is a horrible, the worst thing that could have happened to, I think, the global economy was that the coronavirus occurred during an election year for the United States, because everything became politicized. All the numbers, the constant reporting of numbers that you mentioned, in the US goes beyond what you suggested, that people simply want to hear these things. In fact, the media believes that they need to hear these things. They give the precise number to the last digit, 19,152 today, whatever the number may be. If they had done that last year with the flu deaths, people would have been terrified over a normal seasonal flu. If they reported those numbers every day the way they do now, oh, so many more people are in the hospital with the seasonal flu. Oh, so many people died today of the seasonal flu. We would have been terrified. Now,
so they do this. They do this because, some of Polish specialists are saying that this is some kind of seasonal flu, a little bit stronger than usual, but, it's not something extraordinary.
Well, it's more contagious, and not that much more deadly. Now, the contagion, if it doesn't come with the deadly aspects. Now, of course, what they're trying to do now, they've now begun to try to find other ways to frighten people. They're talking about something they invented called long COVID, that is long-lasting COVID. Now, this is all based upon anecdotal people who are saying, I had this and I still feel bad. Well, okay, some people just have these kind of needs to feel bad. It's just a somatic thing. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm certain that there are people and people that had acute cases, it's almost certain they're going to have long-term effects. If they were hospitalized, had chronic acute symptoms, it won't be a surprise because every respiratory virus has long-term effects if you have an acute case. There's nothing surprising about it. But somehow they're calling it long COVID. So they're going to make this particular illness as if it were unique. Mankind has been dealing with viruses, and up till now we've survived all of them. We've developed herd immunity. Long ago, before there were vaccines, we developed herd immunity. The Spanish flu presumably is a case where herd immunity was reached, although the numbers were, before they got there, were relatively high. But the other thing is this false hope of a vaccine. They say, okay, we're only going to keep you locked down. We're only going to keep you under house arrest until there's a vaccine. There's not going to be a vaccine. There's no guarantee that they can actually perfect one. I really have strong doubts. And if they do, one that most people would feel comfortable taking is 2, 3, 4 years down the road. I would not be eager to take. I'm not eager to take the flu vaccines. At most, we've been administering flu vaccines for decades, and the efficacy rate, the rate of success is usually in the neighborhood of 40, 45%. Okay, now here we've got a new virus for a new approach to vaccines for a new virus. Now, what's the efficacy rate going to be of that? We have no idea. So this is the other thing about the vaccine. It was another way to keep people under control, and this is very dangerous.
What about the issue? Like I would like to mention that there is no clear discussion about all this coronavirus affair, I will say, between specialists in Poland. Mainly the politicians are talking, and the minister of health was a cardiologist. So he was a guy who deals with heart and not with viruses. And publicly, I didn't see the public discussion and the documents signed by the specialist responsible for the health of people as far as epidemiology is concerned. So I think that they take, only the politicians are taking the decisions, and because majority of medical people are depending on the state, they prefer to stay quiet. And because they are paid, if you are, if you are ready to take the action as far as COVID is concerned, you are better paid than if you remain an ordinary medical man. So they prefer to earn more and stay quiet. Sure. So it's some kind of systemic situation, but the majority of society is blind. They do not analyze this situation. They do not see that. For me, it's a clear evidences that something is going wrong, that we are just faked as a society, that someone wants to, as you said, draw our resources to their own pocket. Sure. And what do you think about this? How this situation looks in Thailand and in the United States?
Well, it's interesting in the Anglo-American world. What I've just discovered, and I'm constantly trying to investigate some of the medical literature, scientific literature, to see what's going on to justify different policies. And what I found, and it's almost certain, what we see is there's a policy, and then we begin to see medical journals justifying that policy. So medicine is following politics rather than the other way. Now, this is very dangerous. Now, another aspect of this is if you look at who occupies positions in the World Health Organization, there are very few of those people who are real scientists or real doctors or real medical professionals. They are people who have masters in public health, whatever that is. They have a master's in health economics. They might have a doctorate in something, but maybe in statistics. But these aren't scientists. They're not medical professionals. It's the same, like you said, and even if it is, it's very often the wrong one. We need virologists and immunologists at the forefront, not epidemiologists, not public health professionals. These public health professionals, it's one of the things that really annoys me. If I so choose, I'm entitled, at least in the Anglo-American world, to call myself doctor. I have a PhD. I don't do that. And I certainly would never do that in context of a discussion about medicine. But many of these PhDs who are at the WHO, the CDC, they will, they know that this is fooling people, or at least people are just assuming that they're a medical doctor. So it somehow gives them more credibility. This is really problematic. And so what happens is that, as you mentioned, the general public doesn't have time to investigate these things. They're quite, they say, well, these are experts. I mean, we have to listen. These are medical experts. They're not medical experts. They're public health experts. That means they studied the history of public health. They studied the administration of public health. They didn't study medicine as an instrument to promote individual health. So
the mathematical models of expanding of pandemias, more they changed the definition of pandemia, because if you read some books from 17th century from London, when we have the pest, how you name this, the Black Death, so they were 90% of population dead. And now we are seeing, not even more than in an ordinary flu.
Yeah. Well, a little bit more. I mean,
a little bit. Okay, a little.
It's significantly more. I think we can't ignore that. But and again, it depends on the country. Here, it's not. Certainly not in Thailand. One of the other things that is not discussed at all, and this is very perplexing, is it's not really. Partly because much of the world is, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but much of the world is engaged in discrediting Donald Trump in any way they can. And the coronavirus is one way to do it. And keeping the economies weak is one way to do it. Because if the American economy had remained on the same track that it was on, Donald Trump would have won in a landslide. It's quite clear. There's no way that the Democrats would have found anybody that could have defeated him. And now they've got a senile candidate that's older than Trump that's very likely to beat him. Now, what happens then is that when you give power to people to take over the lives of their citizens and to control the economy, you're going to have these disastrous effects that we're seeing. We're not seeing them. Where is the discussion about China? It started in China. Nobody disputes that except maybe the Chinese. But they're just now in the last days talking about a so-called second wave. But why is it that the country with the largest population in the world has fewer deaths than, say, Sweden? And it's just disappeared there, and it hasn't disappeared anywhere else. There's something really strange about that. Now, again, you could say, well, it's strange that I mean, you could credit the lockdown, you could credit communism, you could credit Xi Jinping, but I'm really concerned about this. I mean, this is really odd. Why is it that Lombardia was depopulated? Why was New York City depopulated on a massive scale when Wuhan, which is larger than in population than all of Lombardia, than most of northern Italy, they suffered so unbelievably? And
yeah, but you know, explanation is such that the population of Lombardia was old. They were people old enough, and the population of communist China, they survived, you know, the period of famine, and they were a lot of dead people because of malnutrition, because of poor medical health care, and so on and so on. So there remains the people who survived. They are more resistant, you know, so they are resistant also to the COVID-19. And the old populations, as in Sweden, as in Italy, if you compare these societies to Polish society, it's also, you can see the difference. The Polish society is it's stronger as far as illnesses is concerned, because probably you know this term from economics. It's creative destruction. So sure. We were, you know, the majority of weak people were killed by the communist during the communist regime. So the survivors are stronger. Okay, yeah. So this is this kind of explanation.
I don't know. I think that I certainly don't dispute that, but I don't think that that's the whole answer, because it's not enough. China has a one-child policy, so that means that they've got fewer young people over time, and those young people are not, especially exposed to the kind of trauma that you've discussed that strengthens people's immune system. So I mean, there's lots of. It's just puzzling to me.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, what we've seen is that even though Lombardia was having enormous difficulties, southern Italy wasn't. So It tended to be regional, or at least it would concentrate in one area. And again, that had probably less to do with lockdowns than other factors. We saw in the United States when New York was having bad problems, the rest of the United States, partly because of climate, partly because of, and also if you look at the flu cycles, if you look at the seasonal flu cycle, New York would have a peak while not much was happening in the South and the Midwest. And then when New York came down, then the South and the Midwest would start coming up. So it wasn't a second wave. It was just the sort of annual cycling of these different regions. And that may be in part what we're seeing maybe in some of the European countries.
Yeah. So now let's go back to Thailand. Could you describe in a few words the present economical situation, how the hotels are looking, how the people are living, how they do earn their own money?
On Phuket, there are literally thousands of hotels. This is a tourist destination, normally full of Chinese, and other Asians, full of Europeans, especially at this time of year. They would be flooding in. There would be thousands arriving every day. Almost all these 10, 20-story hotels are all closed. There are very few of them open. I'm in a small town where there is some farming so that people have other incomes. So where I am it's a town that has a beach. The tourist areas are towns that exist because of the beach. So my place is a little bit different. So things are not quite so bad here. But in the rest of it, it's heartbreaking. There are literally billions of dollars of idle capital. There are destroyed dreams. There are jobs that have disappeared. I mean, all those hotels, they had cleaning people, they had welcoming people, they had drivers, everything. The restaurants had, chefs. They're all closed. I mean, very few of them. There may be 1 in 100 are open. And of those, maybe 1 out of 50 is doing well. They're all struggling just to stay open. Now, the rest of the Thai economy, I mean, they produce automobiles here in the south of Thailand. I mean, it's somewhat industrialized economy. In the north, it's more agricultural. A lot of the people, the good thing about Thailand is that many of the people that lost jobs in the tourist industry were able to go back to a farm. They have families. And so they're struggling, but they're probably managing to feed themselves in general. Now, the problem is in a place like Phuket where, it's a small island. There's not that much farming. There is in my little community, but it's mostly bananas and tropical fruits. And it's not something that's done on a mass scale, but it's enough to feed your family if you need it. But the Thai economy is probably the worst hit of all the Southeast Asian economies. That's what the projections are. So unless and the problem is there's a military junta. There was a coup d'etat a few years back. The ruling general is now the prime minister. And today, there were mass demonstrations, as there have been over the last weeks, that seem to have turned violent. I've been trying to check the news. I saw some footage where there were fires burning and lots of people moving around and the riot police and so on. So it's in a very precarious situation. The government lacks full support of the people. They're in the middle of an unpopular set of pandemic policies. And there is a lot of unhappiness about the ruling monarch, the current king.
And what kind of measure they undertook to support Thai economy, to invite foreign tourists?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, this is the great irony. The first group of foreign tourists they're going to let in are coming from China. Now, China is what brought the virus into the world. They would be the last ones I would want to bring in under any conditions. But anyway, the Chinese do bring in a lot of money, although for the most part, many of the Chinese in the past came in as part of a package tour. What they're going to do now, their brilliant idea about bringing back tourism here is to allow 120 people. 120 people. That's not even an airplane full. They're going to let them in as though that's going to be the beginning of the tourist revival. Every day on Phuket, normally, there'd probably be 120 flights. It wouldn't be 120 people. Now, they were supposed to be here last week, and then it turned out that the government said, well, nobody's applied for these visas. Now, the reason they didn't apply for those visas is that you could stay for a maximum of 30 days, but you have to do a 14-day quarantine in a 5-star hotel. It costs about 3,000 or 4,000 euro for that. You have to have $100,000 life insurance or medical insurance against potential COVID infection. And it's like bizarre. I mean, how many people, I mean, if you come on holiday, you don't want to sit in a hotel for 2 weeks. That's not,
yeah, it's ridiculous.
You go to Thailand for that. You go to someplace else and you don't pay 4,000 euro for the privilege of sitting in a hotel room. So they don't have a good plan. And I think it's the insecurity of being a military junta. They don't have the support, the broad support of the people, so they're overly cautious. But of course they are everywhere. I mean, look at what happened in New Zealand. They got one new infection, and then they shut the whole place, not the whole place, but they shut down a couple of cities again after 1 or 2 people in one family showed an infection. I mean, these overreactions are unbelievable. And
yeah, I think it's the people in power, you know, they became a little bit crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of my good friends in Australia was an economist working for the government of Victoria, the state of Victoria. And he was posting critical comments about the state policies as run by the premier. I think his name is Dan Andrews. Can't remember I think that's his name, but never mind. And he was told, he said, look, you're an employee, you need to take these things down. He said, I resign, I quit. I'm not going to do it. And he is now mounting a full-on assault. It's one man, but he's gaining a lot of popular support there in Australia, and maybe in Australia in general, but certainly in Victoria, to try to reverse these crimes against humanity. This is what I discussed with him months ago. I said, look, this is he said, you're right. You know, I hadn't thought of it that way. This is a crime against humanity because it goes against science. There's no science that existed before. They tried to invent it after the fact, but all the science before the fact said, don't do it.
Yeah.
It's an experimentation it's never been done before. So it's an experiment. And it's against international law to experiment on your citizens, whether you experiment with whatever. But this is a crime against humanity. So the government of Victoria is power hungry, as you mentioned. This guy, and he won't release any background information to justify the policies that he selected because he doesn't have them, obviously. If he did, he'd say, okay, they're available online. You go there and you'll find them. And this will redeem and make everybody understand why what I did is correct. But he doesn't obviously have that. So now.
Yeah. So we are living in a very interesting times. We are witnessing new history, the development of new means of controlling the societies, controlling the people. Thank you very much, Cris, for this very interesting mind exchange. And I hope to hear you soon and discuss another topics.
Wonderful. I'll be happy to do it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. All the best.
All the best.